The war in Ukraine is the very first armed conflict where the fight on social media and on the internet is as essential to victory as bullets, drone strikes, and artillery barrages. Just days after Russian soldiers stormed over the borders, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called out to fighters all over the world to not only take up rifles in defense of his nation, but also to social media. Thousands rallied to his banner with laptops in hand at the same time that veterans of other conflicts packed their own rifles, body armor, and ammunition and headed to the battlefront, eager to fight against Putin's tyrannical dictatorship. Now, Zelensky's so-called IT army engages in a daily battle against Russian troll farms and cyber terrorists. It's busy leaking pro-Ukrainian messages behind Putin's iron informational curtain. I wanted to find out more about how technology was transforming the battlefront, and fortunately, I was able to speak with one investigative journalist who had just landed on the front lines.
Hey, I'm Jeffrey Kane. I am the author of a book called The Perfect Police State about the Chinese surveillance dystopia. Until recently, I was a correspondent on the ground for Wired in Ukraine.
Jeff and I communicated the entire time that he was on the ground in Kyiv as he made arrangements to interview Zelensky in person. Even though the capital is largely safe right now, there is still a constant threat of assassination attempts.
It was extremely strict security protocols. I mean, as many people have heard, Zelensky narrowly escaped a number of assassination attempts. I mean, in the public sphere, we know about a dozen, but it's possible that there are many more that have been kept secret. The Russian commandos at the start of the war were minutes from killing him. They were minutes from the palace. And so security is extremely, extremely strict.
The war in Ukraine is stunningly different from every other conflict that we've seen. But perhaps the most unusual aspect is the frequency that Zelensky shows himself in the media. He appeared in the public square mere hours after Russian special forces attempted to kill him. It wasn't an especially safe strategy. Usually it's a good idea for a national leader to head down into a bunker when bullets start flying around him. But in a social media war, the power of his image alters the moral calculus for fighters on the front lines and allies around the world.
This is the first social media war. I mean, I don't think that there's really ever been a war where the stakes have been so high on people's Twitter accounts, on people's Instagram accounts. This is a new world in which we all live in a social network, and if you don't master the social media, you're not going to win the war.
A few months before Russia crossed into Ukrainian territory, military experts predicted a swift defeat. We had just witnessed the collapse of the Afghan military against the under-equipped Taliban, and it was hard to believe that the Ukrainian military would be able to resist Russia's seemingly invincible army. Obviously, that's not quite how things turned out. And part of the reason is how soldiers and civilians are using technology in new ways.
We're now living in an age in which various technologies, AI, drone warfare, new advances in aeronautics, space, satellites, and so forth, I could go on and on. They're upending the old order of power. It used to be in the 20th century that the guy who could mass produce the biggest and most badass tanks wins the war. The guy who controls the airspace with the best jets wins. You only need one little drone and a guy with a joystick to come right up out of nowhere and just light those things up. I think that's what Russia is learning, is that it's a 20th century power still stuck in the Cold War.
Technology changed both how Ukrainians fight the war on the ground, but just as importantly, it alters the way that people around the world experience that conflict. Today, Ukrainian news networks, internet forums, and social media websites like Reddit show almost real-time footage from drones, live streams, and GoPros. This isn't the era of war correspondents carefully vetting footage and interviewing sources. The information flows out unfiltered for better and worse. I've watched in horror and fascination as drones dropped homemade bombs on Russian soldiers. The camera follows the trajectory and scores a direct hit. An hour after a Javelin missile blows up a Russian tank, the IT army celebrates the victory online. I found myself watching these videos with morbid fascination. What exactly are we supposed to glean from the proliferation of images like this? For a long time, I've advocated that we need more images of violence in the news. There's no reason to sanitize war or murder. Looking away from it makes it all seem like it's not actually happening. But we also have to remember that the stream of images is also part of a critical front in the propaganda war. And this can make it hard for a journalist to really gauge the truth of what is happening on the ground.
So when you're on the ground, this is one of the big challenges, is that social media hasn't just changed the war itself, but has changed how people report. And one of the complaints that I've heard from a lot of reporters out on the front lines in the Donbass of East Ukraine in particular is that so much of the information they get is just coming from the Ukrainian government, the military. It's very difficult. You can't predict where a firefight is going to break out. You can't always be at the scene documenting things. And quite frankly, that's a dangerous situation to be in. Not every journalist really wants to go into those bullet ridden battles. I was mostly in the capital. I was talking to political figures, cultural and political figures in Ukraine. And I found it actually more useful to rely on sources for war information outside of Ukraine. So one example is the Institute for the Study of War has just opened a live Ukraine map that shows troop movements, reported troop movements. Also, there are a lot of really good news sources in Ukrainian, also dissident Russian websites.
So if you're like me, you're probably wondering who this IT army is anyway. In the movies, hackers sit in front of constantly moving digital readouts as they scrutinize matrix-level binary code. You probably already have an inkling that most hackers aren't anything like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, but one of the real strengths of the Ukrainian offensive is that they've been able to recruit people who might otherwise never be fit for service in the army. Indeed, because this is a social media war, the IT fighters can come from anywhere in the world at all.
He said, everyone is a fighter. That was his tagline. And a lot of young people were fired up by his speech, and they signed up for the hacker army, which Ukraine calls the IT army. So what we saw there was essentially they weren't doing anything especially sophisticated, but they didn't need to because Russia's cyber defenses proved to be quite frail, surprisingly frail. They had learned. They used WikiHow, the website. They would load WikiHow articles that teach you how to do a DDoS attack, which is a distributed denial of service attack that takes down websites. They had learned some basic hacking skills, and they told us that it was really only a matter of either days to weeks. That's all they needed to build the skill set to wage a cyber war on Russia. Kids who were 25 years old who just graduated college and they were just playing around on their computers, they were able to punch through Russian military systems. And I watched them. They showed me demonstrations and they said, now we're going to do a DDoS attack.
Developing those offensive skills doesn't necessarily require special training. Some of it is as easy as cutting snippets of code from one website and pasting it on another. Almost anyone can hire a botnet to take a website or email address offline, and that massive, uncoordinated effort is paying dividends. But the IT army has also proven that they can help on the defense as well, which is a much more difficult task.
President Zelensky revealed to me were cyber attacks that had taken place against the National Bank of Ukraine and also against the cabinet of ministers. The goal of the hackers, they determined, was to shut down the pension system, the government pension system, which would then incite chaos. People would have to abandon their posts because they can't get paid, wearing down at the morale of the people. And what he told me is that the IT army was the force that defended against these attacks and really saved Ukraine in the war.
In Kane's interview that was published in Wired magazine, Zelensky praised Elon Musk for allowing Ukrainian fighters to use Starlink satellites to connect to the internet, while Russia jammed all other means of communications. This turned out to be a game changer.
How effective has the Starlink system been?
Starlink, наскільки нам
Дуже ефективно. Дуже ефективно. Я дуже вдячний.
Yeah, Starlink worked perfectly. Also, well, in areas that I will not discuss because of sensitive nature. To generally, I would say, continuing to the previous question, whenever you lose contact with the people, you're losing much, if not everything. And Starlink has greatly contributed to keeping connection to our people, even in temporarily occupied territories in siege zones, because in some places, Russia would break all the communications from Ukraine. And we know firsthand accounts from those people who were there that Russians would tell us that there is no more Ukraine, that the government has fallen, and at some point, with no other information, you tend to start to believe it. So this is very important. Starlink is a perfect solution that really helps us.
There's no doubt that Starlink was available just in the nick of time, but there's also something slightly disturbing about how a billionaire tech mogul like Musk has been able to have such a profound influence on an armed conflict. At the same time that he tries to change the way the world communicates by purchasing Twitter, he's also playing a role in actual military communications. While he seems to be on the right side of history at the moment, who is to say that tech giants won't play a more sinister role if they choose to back, say, another player in the future? Who's to say that this isn't just a PR move that could reverse course in an instant?
I think we should. Elon Musk is a profit-making person, and he's a technologist who's not always going to have his own interests, aligned with the outcome of a nation's war or the future of a society. I think this is something that we have to be careful to weigh, because the fact of the matter is that yes, there is a lot of evidence that Starlink has helped, and I also don't know how much of this is really a kind of a spectacle, a show, Elon Musk trying to show his stuff. But regardless of that, I can't deny that this has been really helpful to the Ukrainian military.
Whatever the moral calculus is, it seems that Putin's Starlink stations are now also military targets.
One of the big concerns early in the war was that the Russian military was going to target Starlink systems on the ground in Ukraine. So Elon Musk put out a tweet and said that if you're using Starlink in Ukraine, make sure you keep it out of the sight of satellites. Put a camouflage net over it, something, just take care of yourself, because there was a threat back then that when the Russian military was trying to knock out Ukrainian communications, they would actively be searching for Starlinks on their satellite systems, and they would launch missiles at that.
Social media helped recruit the IT army, and Starlink provided direct communications to the front lines. These have been enormous assets to the Ukrainian cause. But in a trend that we haven't seen since Americans and British mercenaries fought against Franco in the Spanish Civil War, foreign fighters from the UK, USA, Philippines, and all around the world have bought their own plane tickets and landed in Kyiv. They've enlisted for a chance to do their part on the front lines. Many of those reinforcements came because of Zelensky's intense social media presence and non-stop drumbeat in the mainstream media. Kane has met dozens of these fighters, and I wanted to ask him what motivated them.
What I can say is that they are idealists. I think that a lot of them are vets who, maybe they served in special forces in Afghanistan or Iraq somewhere. And despite the horrors of war, there's that old saying, that war is a drug, and it's the adrenaline that keeps them coming back. So a lot of them, they're idealists mixed with adrenaline junkies. They're doing it because they believe in the future of democracy. They don't like Putin. They also believe, they also want to go back into the field. They want to fight. But that said, I don't think this has been reported sufficiently out there. I think that there is there's a huge number of these people who have put down their arms and returned home. They showed up to the war, and these are people I've talked to. They've showed up. It hasn't been what they expected it to be. A lot of times, one guy I met, so he's a former Navy SEAL. He showed up, and he was complaining that he wanted to get to the field. He wanted to fight with his rifle. But the Ukrainian military put him in a room and just left him there, just kind of left him to his devices. It might have been, maybe he was the part of some propaganda thing that the Ukrainian military was doing, like showing this America guy showing up to, to help the local people.
Whether they know it or not, and whatever their motivations are, every foreign fighter is also a symbol of support for the Ukrainian cause. In some ways, it makes sense that the Ukrainian military might be hesitant to put those fighters in harm's way, lest they get killed in combat and turn the international sentiment against the Ukrainian cause. But it's also clear that at least some of these fighters are actually on the front lines using the skills that they honed in other combat zones around the world.
All right. So far, we took out 7 Russian tanks. After a long firefight, took control of the area. Right now, we're going to just kind of sweep around and see what we got left. Some stragglers. Take them out. Call it a day. It's been a long day. It's been a long day, baby. Yeah, buddy. 1, 2, 3, 4 Russian tanks taken out. Call that a good day. This is I don't know if you guys know what this is behind me, but that's a Russian tank. Russian tank that was taken out.
Jeffrey Kane has been to Kyiv twice, and he watched the Russian army make it all the way to the outskirts of the city, only to be thrown back all the way to the eastern part of the country. At the time that I'm recording this, Russia still controls about 20% of Ukrainian sovereign territory. I wanted to ask him how he thought the war would play out from here.
I don't think that there is going to be a solution in which Ukraine manages to completely push Russian forces out of the eastern region, the Donbass. I think the reality, and the historical reality too, is that this region has always been the site of a pro-Russian uprising, Russian-aligned uprising. Like, Ukraine's not going to kick them out that easily. I think they're already dug in. They're going to stay there for a long time.
I doubt this will be my last video on the subject, so please stick around on this channel and take a look at my coverage of Putin's propaganda machine and my best guess of what might happen if he opts to go nuclear. I'm also including a link to my newsletter, which you should really sign up for. It's free, and I send out notifications for new videos, book recommendations, and other projects that I'm working on that don't end up on this channel. Please like and subscribe, and also let me know what you think I should cover next. Thanks so much for watching.